Well, hello and good morning, everybody. This is Jeremiah, and we have a webinar for you. Starting off 2018 with a bang, we have a really packed schedule of webinars all this year, and so a great place to start all the way at the start, the super start of just basic setup stuff. So speaking of basic setup stuff, let me back up even more. This webinar interface, if you're not used to it, this is your first webinar. I sure like going up to the top of the screen where there's view options, and I like to exit the full screen mode. I just don't like it taking over my whole screen. That's a personal preference, just let you know that's there. And of course, there's that Q&A box. Do familiarize yourself with it where it says Q&A. Feel free to type in just about anything in there. Got myself and Amanda here, and we'll be answering those questions and getting them routed over to Jake. And just one last little housekeeping item here is just kind of what this webinar is not. What this webinar is not going to be is, we're not going to get into planting. We're not going to get into what Land Effects does. We're not going to get into really a lot of things. This is hyper focused on just that very, very first step of you got Land Effects, what do you do now? That very first step. And we'll point out a lot of our other documentation and videos that are good complements to this. But all of our webinars really should be seen as being very specific to a single subject. The one next week is going to be on planting, getting that too, just the planting setup, nothing more. So highly recommend if you're new to the software, sign up for everyone and watch them. There are people in here, I can see some good friends. There are people attending this webinar who have been using Land Effects for over a decade. So if you're new to the software, you do have some catching up to do. So these webinars are a great way to do that. I think I've blabbed enough. I am now going to get this handed over to Jake to take it away.
Great. Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeremiah, and welcome everybody. I think this is probably the largest attended webinar that we've had definitely in a long time. So it's great to have everybody out here. So like Jared said, we're going to be talking about admin setup, and what that means is, just like he said, it's just setting up your stuff, understanding what's going to be going on as you start using Land Effects and how we do things. So with no further delay, this is me. This is who's talking to you. I am one of the irrigation specialists and do deal a lot with the content and the training. So definitely anything that you have questions with will be covered by me at some point, probably, or Amanda or one of our teammates. So the outline is definitely packed, and we're going to try to get through all of this. So if we can make sure that we have those questions ready, get those over so that we can kind of just cruise through this, sort of stay laser focused, that'd be really great. So first, we're going to really talk about that design workflow, whether it's the original workflow that you're used to, but just understanding the concepts of why we do what we do. And then going right into starting projects, what those different options look like, and then just getting really familiar with that whole these dialog boxes as you start your projects. And again, going even deeper than that, what kind of tools that we offer from a backing up, restoring, sharing those projects, even restricting those projects from a permissions level. We'll get into just really quickly about understanding those projects, how they actually get associated with or act with DWGs, and how you can kind of tell what's assigned to what and how to sort of maneuver those. And then again, really on the top level, adding two projects. We're not going to get into the whole placing and all that content type of stuff, but just what kind of options are there for you from that standpoint. And if we have time, we will get into the preferences, just the basics of where those defaults are held, how you should set those things up so that as you start projects, you are going to be smooth sailing from then on out. So I want to start out with kind of a workflow process that we'll consider this kind of the old way, maybe the physical way if you're used to using manila folders and a file cabinet and stuff like that. But what we want to do is we want to understand the concepts of how we should be organizing stuff. And what I mean by that is we're going to have all kinds of different clients to do projects for. And that specific client might have different leveled projects that you're going to work on. Maybe it's the same site, maybe it's different sites, maybe it's different projects all within one site. But the way that you're typically going to structure your stuff, whether you're using LandFX or not, is you're going to create a folder, right? You're going to create some way of keeping track of all the stuff that you're going to be researching, going to be adding to that design to be able to produce that final design. So what we're going to consider this is just picture this as if you were looking through the catalogs and looking through books and bookmarking stuff, and you're going to save all of that information into an area, into a folder, whether that folder is digital on your computer just in Windows, but you're going to save that. And it's going to go and it's going to be named that project. You're going to start another project, and you're not going to keep putting stuff into that initial project. You're going to make a new folder, right? You're going to make sure that that is separate so that you can easily access all of that information. Now, that project might be completely different. It's going to have a different, maybe a different goal in mind or different plans altogether. Or you might even have some of that same stuff that you're going to be working on from that past project. And what we don't want to do, right, we don't want to pull that information from project 1 and just put it into project 2 because it needs to stay in project 1. So there's got to be some type of cloning, some type of copying of that information. But in any respect, you're going to be taking those two components and you're going to be saving that into that new project. Now you're going to be organized. You can go back and you can reference these. So from that aspect, you're going to then go about your design. You're going to be copying blocks. You might be drawing things from scratch. You might be building each project up, but it's going to be basically to match whatever you've researched. So what we want to do is we want to understand the terminology behind the new way of thinking, this new workflow process. Even though it's really following the same guidelines, we typically hear, a CAD file called a project, right? We say, oh, I'm working on a project. Well, what we want to make sure we understand and is clear is that we consider that CAD file a drawing or the design or even the DWG. But that CAD file is technically named, considered this drawing because a project, the word project, is considered a data file. In our eyes, the project is what holds that information. That folder that's going to hold all that research, all the equipment, all that stuff for that design, that's what we're considering a project. So as we go forward, keep that in mind that we're going to be talking about projects. The projects is that data file. So thinking of that in the same concept, but keeping organized within one program now is that one-stop shop for all of that data. So if we're going to think about that, another little visual here is we're going to open up CAD. We're going to start a project. Again, we're going to start that data file. Now, obviously, CAD's going to be open because we do need AutoCAD to interface, but we're going to essentially make that folder. We're going to do all of our research, and that research is going to go just like we would have done it originally. And it's going to be saved as that initial project. Now, what we want to keep in mind is that everything in CAD is CAD, okay? So you're still going to just start working in AutoCAD. But now, once you start doing stuff, that data, that project data, now gets assigned to blocks. It gets assigned to different objects. It's able to attach itself to the things that you're going to put in your design. So as we start a project and you add certain plants or you add certain irrigation or hardscape, there's data that gets tied to that, which then in turns allows you just to start doing your design. So we'll do one last visual here from the project standpoint, that this is what we're going to be looking at as we get into CAD a little bit later into this webinar. But you're going to notice that we have a projects list. And as we start a new project, that new button is equivalent to that project folder, that little manila folder that's going to hold all of that information. And we can do this now in a very, very well organized manner, allowing us to have these subfolders that stores all of that data, all of that information into its respective place. Okay, so once we have all of that in its respective place, we're going to be able to just start our design and start doing what we need to do on the actual design level within AutoCAD. So with that in mind, we want to start a project. Now, before we move over to CAD, I want to do one more visual to show how that data sort of works. So we're going to talk a little bit, and we're not going to get really deep into this at all, but the cloud versus local, these different options you have from an install standpoint, we will definitely be doing a further webinar on that. So what we want to show here is just the general concept of how LandFX works and integrates with that workflow. So we really have three different components that we want to touch on. We have our cloud content, and this is essentially on our side for LandFX, and we host all of the plant data and the irrigation data and the site manufacturer stuff and all of our blocks. Now, that has to go somewhere as you do your design. So when we start a project, it actually goes into two different sections, right? We have our LandFX folder, which is going to be basically where all of those CAD or those tangible files land so that LandFX can operate. And then we have our database. And that database is going to definitely have two different options. We won't get really far into it, but we will kind of touch bases on it if the question arises. But essentially, that's our project list. That's our project managers. That's all of that data that gets associated to those CAD blocks. Now, what's really cool about this is having this additional file, and I'll show you the LFX file, the data file that gets generated for a specific project. But what's really nice about this and the benefit is that we can actually have CAD be CAD. And a really common question that we get a lot is, is somebody that doesn't have LandFX going to be able to open our drawings? And the answer is absolutely yes, because what we're doing is we're just doing stuff in AutoCAD. They're going to be blocks. It's going to be designed the same way. But what those blocks have in the back end is a separate data file. And that separate data file allows us to stack on top of and build on and have these additional features. So being able to have that independent data file from the DWG allows us to span across multiple DWG files with that same data file. It allows us to have access to that data without having access to the DWG. And that's a really powerful thing when we need to make changes or add content. We can do that without having the DWG at that specific moment, which is always definitely bonus. So one thing to really, really keep in mind as we do all of this, we talk about how we have all of this data and how we have these blocks downloading automatically, is we're not storing the actual DWG files from your side of things, right? The actual DWG files, the actual drawing files that you're working on are not being stored by us. So obviously that's something that is handled on your end. And that is something that we need to make very clear, that we're not managing all of your working drawings. we basically provide you, obviously, the content that we create, and it's, being cloud allows us to auto download as needed. But from a backing up and restoring process, we very, very much stress the importance of backing things up. And I'll actually go into a little bit later where all these different places are that do get backed up and kind of how to keep those things in line. So without further ado, any questions that have come up thus far, Jared, that we need to cover, or can we go right into AutoCAD?
I think we're doing great. Dive right in.
Awesome. So we are in AutoCAD. Okay, so in essence, whether you have our FXCAD or your own AutoCAD version, things are going to be essentially the same. But what we want to focus on is the FX Admin tab. That FX Admin tab is going to host all of the administrative or general settings that don't really deal with a site planting, irrigation, details specific task. And what you'll want to keep in mind, obviously, at the beginning of each of these tabs is going to be a manager. And that manager essentially are those subfolders that we showed in that slide as you start a project. And we'll go into that in just a little bit, but those are the subfolders that hold the data for each of those tasks. And that's very important because depending on what you're trying to do, that is how you're going to get there. So under the FX Admin tab, the project list is the overall holder of this list. Now, whether you're cloud installed or local installed, this list is going to be the holder of all projects that you've started. And there are a few different buttons here that we're going to go over and kind of go in depth in from this aspect. But what we want to kind of keep in mind is maybe a few little indicators that's going to help us indicate, depending on the DWG that we have open, how things are being assigned. So right now you can obviously see that we've got quite a few little projects in here, and these again are data files. Does not matter at all what CAD file that I have open. I could open any one of these items and have access to that data. Now, what we want to do is we want to start a new project. And this is going to be a super important concept right now, is that each of these projects, just like we talked about in the very first slide, as we start a project for a client, we're gathering information that is going to be specific for that project. It's going to have specific plants, it's going to have specific hardscape, it's going to have everything pertaining to that project in general. Now, what we're going to want to do is make sure that we start a new project for every design that we do. And what I mean by that is we do not want to use that same project file, the same this data file right here for different clients, for different projects, because something might change specifically to that project that you're working on. And as you make the change in this file, it will change for every file or every DWG that is assigned to it. So it is a very, very good practice to have a new project for every design that you do. Now, you might have a design that spans a couple different DWGs. That is when you can actually assign the same project, because the same project information is going to be pertained to actually go across all those DWGs, which is the benefit of having that single data file, that separate data file. So as we start a new project, this number here is going to be our project number, and that is a unique number. That unique number is going to be based on, maybe you have a client number, a project number, go by date. We'll go ahead and go by date for now. And we'll go ahead and say admin setup. The name itself can be the same if you really want it to. We suggest, keeping it unique to what that project is. And we'll go over basing on a template in just a second, but we're just going to start a project just so you can see how this works. And again, the preference set we'll cover a little bit later if we can, but just understand this is how you can make all of your projects consistently with the text, the fonts, and all that kind of stuff. We'll go ahead and hit OK. So once we hit OK, this is going to start that folder. It's going to start that specific organized folder for that specific project here. And you're going to see here are the actual subfolders. Didn't mean to click on that. Here are our subfolders, and these subfolders are going to kick us directly to the tabs that I was talking about before. So it's just a shortcut to get to where you need to be, but this is essentially going to manage what information is going to go into that project. So we can put a description if we need to. We can assign a specific detail folder for project-specific details, all of which we're not going to get super far into. So we've now just created a project. And that project, again, has permissions. Now, we've given these different permissions because we might have those newbies on the team, or we might have certain people that aren't allowed to make specific changes, and we've made it so that you have different levels of access, and whether it's by user, by read-only, giving other people admin rights for certain changes, all that kind of stuff. We have documentation, and a really, really important thing to keep in mind is having this more info link next to any of our stuff. That more info link is going to kick you right to what that dialog box is pertaining to. So being able to I guess, learn more about the tool that you're working on, there's always going to be more info link or a help link to help with guiding you on those little journeys there. So keep that in mind. Now that we've created that project, and that was in our project manager, you can go back to your project list, and you can actually see that. If we look here, where did I save it here? And Jerry, I actually don't see my project. Did I save it or did I delete it?
I don't know. I was testing something myself, and I created a project, and it created fine on my end. So
that is really interesting.
It's definitely a little odd. Maybe just create another one real quick.
Yeah, that was weird. I don't know what I did there. Maybe I did something. So we'll go ahead and do another one here. All right, so if we go back to our project list, there he is. Okay, so I must have did something there. Now, with that webinar project that we just created, you have a couple different options, obviously. What we suggest and I think there was actually a question about this, so I'll just answer it now, is about templates. And the templates that you are going to create, there's a way to set up a project with all of the information that you're going to use and create a template so that as you start new projects, you can base it off of that one. So all the work that you've done, if we're going to look at this at a BIM level or a BIM perspective here, is you should be able to front load a lot of the work and the time that it's going to take to set up something and save a lot of time on the back end. And being able to create a project, assign the plants, assign the blocks, everything that you're going to use from a general aspect, you can do that and select it and save it as a template. And this template can be general use. Maybe you make one for planting, maybe you make one for irrigation specific, maybe it's different levels of planting based on clients, but you can see now that I have a template here. So as I start a new project, and we'll just make this one, this guy, we can see we can choose general use from that template. Now, I obviously have not added anything in that template, so I don't have an option to choose one of these items. If you've actually built this out, which we're obviously not going to do, you can actually choose which section or which task you want to fill out based on that template. So you can be selective in that respect. Now, backing up is, again, a very, 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 very important part. And we do our best to help with and aiding in that backup process. Now, what you'll notice, and I'm going to open up my land effects folder location. Now, based on that slideshow we did at the first, there was a spot where blocks went, and there was a place where the data went. This is the land effects folder. This holds all of the CAD files, the CAD blocks and stuff that get downloaded from land effects. If you go into the data file folder, there's a backup folder. And in that backup folder, there is a time-stamped folder that is auto-generated based on what you're actually backing up based on that day. So you can see that I actually have one from today because I removed a couple things already. Now, what you'll notice is if I take this guy and hit delete, I can't uncheck backing up a project to an LFX file to delete it. If I uncheck delete, or if I go ahead and hit backup, I can back it up. I then have the option to delete, but I cannot ever delete something without backing it up. So we're trying to put these safe holds in place to kind of protect that project data file, because that is an important file that's going to aid in the design. So we'll say okay, and it's removed it from this list. Now, it is deleted from the data file list. It is not here anymore, but you'll notice that it is right here now within that current date folder. Now, what we're going to do here is kind of go over how to identify that a project is assigned so that you can see that we've even got another level of backup available here. So if you can see this, I've got two DWGs. I've got a project assigned and I've got a project not assigned yet. And I want to make sure that you see the difference between those two things. So there's actually going to be nothing in this file from a drawing perspective. I'm going to open this guy up too here. And same thing here. So these, in all intents and purposes, look the same, but there's something different. There's a project data file that is assigned to one and not assigned to the other. So we're going to go ahead and go to the project already assigned. And if you go to your project list, you're going to notice that it highlights differently than what you saw before. Before you saw it highlighting just up here, but you can see that this DWG is actually assigned to this project. So what I'm going to do is close out of here, and I'm going to go to this not assigned. I'm going to go back to the same project list, and you're going to notice that it's highlighting this top one. Now, could be that it's assigned to this one. However, if I go to any other tools and try to go to the manager, it's going to kick me right over to this project list, which is the first indication that I have not set a project to this file. Very, very important, because you cannot start placing things, and it's a good cross-check as you maybe are trying to just place stuff that you're not doing stuff incorrectly. But this project is not assigned yet, so I can actually click on any one of these buttons, even the project manager, and it's going to kick me over here to choose a project. if I pick a project and hit open, I can now have access to that project's data file. That project specifically, I can go into any one of the managers and start doing things. This is how it was set up. Now, if I've saved that file, and we're going to go back to this folder here real quick, you're going to notice that there's no other files in here except for those DWGs. If I were to save this file that has a project assigned to it, we try to keep, again, a safe backup somewhere. So I'm going to go back over here, and you're going to notice an LFX file was created, that .back.lfx file. That's a backup of that project data file. So if you've started a project, you've started your design, you've saved that irrigation file, and then accidentally deleted it from the project list here, you can restore that back into the system by finding or navigating and finding that file. So it looks like the 9010-00 was our guy here. We'll just go ahead and we'll delete it. Again, obviously it's going to back up if I delete it. So I'll have it both here, and I'm going to have it if I restore and import. You're going to see that it's going to go to that data file, but it'll also go to, let me find it here. You can find it right where that CAD file is saved, and I can open him. It'll bring in that project number, and it'll restore him back into the system. So knowing that you have at least 2 backups from the data file in the LandFX folder and the LFX file in the actual location of the DWG is very, very important. Now, we definitely suggest even further backing up, and that backing up is whether that's to an external hard drive, a place off-site, USB, whatever it is, Dropbox, you name it, that should be a part of it. So I think we can handle a couple questions here, Jer.
Sure, yeah, we're getting quite a few questions, which is great. So here's a good one for you, is Joanna asks, can you reassign project numbers or names once you've started working on the file?
Oh, that's a great one.
Rename that.
Yeah, that's a great one. So yeah, we restored this one in. I accidentally named it wrong or something like that. Let's go ahead and open him back up. And we'll go ahead and change him. He was actually supposed to be 01-02. Trainer 2017 is now actually trainer 18, and we'll say okay. And you're going to get a prompt that yes, it has been changed, everything's good. So if we went back to that list, you'll see now that his name is changed and he's good to go. And again, if I save, and this is the cool, I think the cooler part of things is you're going to see that it did not override that initial backup file. It created a new one with the new name. And this is really powerful from a timestamp standpoint. And if you need to make changes for some reason, maybe set permissions and then set them back, you can restore previous versions of that project and see what you've actually got going on there. So it's really, really important to not just get rid of these files, but it's a great breadcrumb trail if something ever does come up. So hopefully that answered that one. Anything else?
Yeah, I got a couple. Let's see here. So this was another good one from Lewis. A few questions here on backups, basically. So definitely reminding everyone of where that backup folder location is. But specifically, Lewis asks, he says, every time we update LandFX, we do get that option to back up the projects. And so he was just kind of wondering what that backs up, and is that different for every person because they have multiple people in their office and so on.
Okay. Yeah, so the backup option that he's talking about, if we're going to go here, and actually I gotta do this, see if I can get this back here, is you have an option to check for updates, obviously, but you can actually back up all projects. And if we do that, see if that works here. That's going to take a second. But what it's going to do is it's going to essentially back up every one of those projects that are in that project list. Again, focusing, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jared, but focusing only on the projects, not the preference sets.
Oh no, it's gonna
do everything.
It's backing up all projects that are not marked read-only, because
Okay.
that's maybe kind of so that's your ability to speed this up a little. Is if you're done with a project, mark it as read-only. It doesn't need to keep backing it up, but it will always back up all preference sets regardless of their setting because they're so important. And it'll also back up all templates regardless of their setting. Actually, a template is by definition read-only. So that way, every time you back up quote unquote all, that does include your most important data, which is templates and preference sets.
Awesome. Yeah. So this is just about done here. So we're going to show you what that's going to look like now. And I think the kind of the genius part of this too is that as then you have these backups, how do you identify what's what, right? So very important to try to figure out what you've got to bring back from a backup location. So what we're going to do here is we're going to let this thing finish here and pull up the actual backup folder here. So it's going to prompt you, it'll obviously tell you that everything's been backed up. And it's going to tell you, again, the location of where that backup is, right? So we'll go here, and you can see this is, that's much more than I had before. But if you notice, it tells you exactly what it is. We got our preferences, we have our templates, and then we have all of our projects, all the exactly named projects there. So definitely keeps things organized for you and backed up. And again, that trail, that breadcrumb trail of how far back those go, we definitely urge to back up regularly so that you have this kind of trailing system there. So we'll go ahead and go to the next thing. And what if I accidentally assigned, or what if I made a mistake and actually picked a different project to open on this drawing? And this is really important to know, because if I do that and open up, the stuff that I've placed is going to get kind of, the data is going to go away. The blocks will still be there, but they might not function. So how do we cross-check that? I'm going to hit open on a different project, and you're going to see, you're prompted before it even just switches, it tells you that there's already a project associated. And if you're saying, yes, I'm sure that I want to associate this drawing with the selected one, okay, it'll let me, but it's going to basically override or open up this new project and kind of go from there. And a great example of that is on something that you've already done. So we have this here. We'll go ahead and view data on this guy. And you're going to see that I have information, this data. This is where that data applies to. This is a block, but I'm able to see that underlying data. Now, if I go to our project list, I can see that he's assigned to this irrigation project. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to pick this guy. But it's going to tell me this is associated. I'll say yes. But now these are the ramifications that are going to happen. You might not see anything physically here, but as I look at this data, I'm going to get other messages telling me, hey, there's something wrong with that block. I can't access that equipment. So now we've got to go figure out what in the world we did. And that's definitely a cause of using the same project, again, the same data file across different DWGs. Maybe I changed that head and on a different drawing, but using the same project file. Well, so now I've just messed up this drawing and now I got to correct it. So understanding that that's how important that project is to this this file for those blocks is super, super important there. So now I've just assigned the project. I can go back in, I can view that data, and he's going to show right back up. Picks right back up where it was. It knows what to look for, but it does need the right stuff in order for it to do it. So before we move on, any last questions?
If we have a little more time later, I'd be happy to revisit some of them. Go for it.
Perfect. All right. So how do we actually unassign a project? We might want something completely fresh. Maybe it was just a drawing that we cleared stuff out, and so it's blank, but it keeps assigning that same project. There's a couple ways of obviously doing that, but the main one that is used in any scenario here is hyperlink base. So if we type hyperlink base here, oh, come on. It's going to tell you what it's assigned to, but you can actually follow the command prompts and press period for none. Now, it doesn't look like it did anything, but if you save this file, so we just saved him, and we'll go ahead and we'll close him. And we'll come over to here, you can see that we have a backed up copy of that project already assigned, of that this trainer one here. Okay, so now if I open up project already assigned, the key thing that we're looking for here is obviously what happens if I click project manager. It's going to kick me right back to the project list, which means that I don't have a project assigned to this project anymore, or this drawing anymore. So makes it really easy to be able to then sort of restart your thinking, maybe add a new one and assign it properly. But you can unhook something that's already assigned just by typing hyperlink base. Our Nuke tool actually does that as well, but with a bunch of other stuff that we're not going to get into. So now, what does that mean from a sharing standpoint, or backing up and sharing standpoint? We have one more way that we can definitely back something up, but it's also the way that we can actually share this project. And this is the way that we've requested as we handle tech support and stuff like that. If you have a problem with your drawing and you want us to help solve that, we do need that data file. That's why that data file is so important. Not only do we just need the DWG to see what's wrong, but we need that associated project data with it. So to be able to do that really, really easily, and I'll just grab this planting plan. We'll save him here, is to be able to use our tech support tool. And this is kind of like a eTransmit, but it does wrap up of everything. And so what it's going to do is it's going to copy that DWG to the desktop, and it's going to zip it up so that we can get all that information. Now, it'll wrap up everything that needs, obviously, for this project. And what it's going to do is going to tell you what it is and what the drawing file name is. And it's actually going to kick open this tech support ticket for you to attach it. Now, I don't want this. I just want that folder. And I'll show you here what that folder looks like. And you can see that within that folder, I've got my XREF, my planting plan, and my preference set and my project data file. And those are very important little files here. But I can essentially just take this zip file and send it to the person that I want to share this with. And they'll have everything that they need to be able to see what you're seeing if they're using Land Effects. So really, really cool to be able to have that backup as well if you're going to send that file around or whatever you're going to do. So how do we restore a thing? Now, we kind of did it already, but hitting this restore button is going to allow us, again, from a, we'll do it to this one, that's fine. We'll go ahead and back him up. but we're going to make this a read-only project. And this is what Jeremiah was talking about. We can actually mark these projects read-only, and that allows any further changes to be done. But we'll go ahead and drop him off, and you can see that he's gone. So where in the world did he go? Well, he's essentially in a little read-only location here, and we can activate him, and we can grab him, and we can bring him back to life as not read-only. But if we go ahead and delete him, just say okay, and he's gone. Now I can restore, and again, he's not here in read-only, but he is in a place where I can import from. And this is going to go to that data file, or that backup folder location, and I can go and I can find where that one. Now here's the cool part is, again, we don't want to ever override our data files, so it does make a copy, and it is timestamped so we know which one's the most recent one. So this guy looks like the guy that we just did. He's the most recent. I'm going to open him back up and bring him back in. So as we are sharing files, if you're using somebody else's, maybe working with a different firm, and they're giving you those files, those are the tools that you're going to use to be able to bring in their data and easily handle it from that aspect. So now we're going to touch on, we've created a new project, and we have shown you a couple of ways to restore those or start a project from a template. But what if we want to maybe bring in plants after the fact? We've started our project, we've got our manager open, and I don't have the right plants in here that were in my template, so I know that I used those plants from a different project. Well, we have our import tool, and that import tool allows us to grab from any project, and again, granted it has actual plants in there, but we'll go ahead and we'll just see if this guy has some here. And you can see that here's the list of plants that are within the tree section. So I can take and I can highlight whatever ones I need, and I can add those to my project. And what that's going to do is it's essentially going to amend to the project that you already have assigned without hurting the actual project that you just pulled from. So now I can make alterations to these plants without hurting the plants in that other project. And this is the way that we really, really suggest doing stuff. You can even let's go to our shrubs, we'll import, let's go down to the bottom, let's see if we have any actual, these are within our template then. So based on our template, these are the shrubs that we have. So maybe this project requires some of these here. And those are the ones that we want. And we can add those to our project. And then once we do that, now they're here in this project. And that's how easy it should be to definitely start a new project and to be able to just pull where needed, but don't use that same project. And now I can use these things into my drawing. Everything should be set up just the way that I want it, and we're good to go. So the other thing, I don't know, Jared, do we have time to talk about the embedded data for the planting, or should we leave that for another time?
I think that's a good thing to mention, sure.
Okay, cool. So I have a blank drawing. There's nothing in this right here. Let's even see what project is assigned to it. Open up my manager for this guy here. Looks like it's assigned to my 00 webinar. All right. So I'm going to go over to my planting plan, and this planting plan was already done, but for some reason I forgot the ideal workflow that LandFX suggests, and I took a couple of these guys here, or just maybe one here, and I copied him and I put him over here, in this drawing, and I pasted him here. And that's how I used to do stuff, right? I had a big file with all my plant blocks and stuff like that, and as I would just pull from it and start my design. That's ideally not the way that we should do things. However, we're trying to mitigate that a little bit, and we can do that with embedded data. And so even though this plant does not exist in my list here or in this project, if I use some of these tools to see the information on that, if it is placed by LandEffects, you're going to see that it does pull up that information, which is kind of magic. And I can say, okay, and look at that. Magically, it dumps into my plant manager. And now it's actually assigned to this project. And I have that plant available, and he's good to go. So I do have some limited flexibility to be able to bring stuff over. Now, we're working on that from an irrigation standpoint, but ref notes and planting, that embedded data can definitely be helpful if you happen to make those copies, or maybe somebody else took over that file that doesn't have LandEffects and just started copying and doing the design. It's not the end of the world, and we can kind of work from that and get things up to date. But it's just something, again, kind of cool that we're helping across the board be able to take from and bring over to, and still have that kind of flexibility there to work with. So let's see here. So we've gotten through being able to import and export. We're going to move on to some preferences, unless there's any questions on what we did.
Well, like I said, definitely a lot of questions, but Amanda and I have been able to answer them all.
Okay.
If we do get a couple minutes at the end, I'd love to revisit a couple of them, but I think
Okay.
it's well worth showing the preferences.
All right, great. So the preferences is definitely, I would consider that kind of the heartbeat of how these projects function. As you add your plants and stuff like that, your legends, anything and everything that you're going to be doing in this project specifically is dealing with our preferences. And this preference set is something that you can create several of. I think there's a time and a place for different preference sets. They definitely should not be used freely, maybe less liberal from a preference set standpoint, because this preference set is that office standards. It's how you can manage that standard of what's being used, and being able to set the specific text styles to how or what LandEffects is using. A lot of these call out styles, or our piping tools, or the plant call out, all of these has a specific function, and LandEffects is going to take these settings and it's going to help manage the way that you actually work. So being able to create that look that you want for your actual designs is how it's going to be applied to those projects as you start things. Not only from a textile, the layers that are being used from as it brings blocks in, and the colors that it uses, but the dim styles that you're going to use, what that numeric display is going to look like. This is even where your update options are at. But getting into each of those different subcategories of what options are available. So if we go into our planting, what kind of plant label do I want my drawing to have? To have all of these things so that I don't have to set it up every time is a really, really great feature here. So being able to have not only these, but then as I add a plant, what container sizes are available? What's my default? All of that information is set up here in our preference set. And as soon as you get that set up, that's when you start, and again, LandEffects has a default already set in there that you can just plug and play and then start tweaking as you get more familiar with it. But to be able to click manage and start a new preference set based on the one that was active, and we can call this one Webby. and it will essentially clone all of those settings and make it unique to this specific preference set. What we kind of guideline is not per client necessarily that you should have a preference set, but if your client is wildly different, maybe it's a metric versus imperial, maybe it's a different municipality that requires certain sizes that are different than what you normally output, that is when it would warrant a preference set. And that preference set then you can change and alter. And as you start that project, we'll go back over here real quick, go to our project list, we'll go to new. And as you start that new project, you can base it off of these conditions, so that as you start adding your information, it is going to be pulling from that specific standard, essentially. So with that in mind, then, if we go here in FX admin, here's all of our preference set locations, but just in general, this is how you get to it. To be able to manage those preference sets and to set permissions for those specific preference sets, that CAD manager of your office can now kind of lock this down just a little bit to where we're not always changing the fonts and we're not always changing the layers that are being used, but really start to hone in on keeping that standard and being able to have that there. Being able to back up all of those preference sets again will allow us to keep that backup safe, keep those preferences what they need to be, and so that you can obviously restore as needed for that item. So shouldn't have clicked that button, but any questions now, Jer?
Oh my gosh, just so many. So I've just been furiously typing over here. Definitely want to give a very big announcement about the February 2 webinar, because this, as you know, we were prepping for this. We were specifically very clear about keeping this webinar specific. So anything on regarding cloud installation, cloud data, the difference between cloud and local, that's going to be the February 2 webinar. So a lot of these questions would be handled by that.
Cool.
We also had a lot of people asking questions about backups. Is that backup all projects? Is that folder too big? How often should they do it? Can it automatically go to a external drive? Things like that. And a lot of those sorts of questions sort of depend, but it's right there. I would just basically say if you feel that's too big and you want to delete some of those the oldest folders every year, go for it. If you also want to automate moving that whopping 1.3 gigabytes to a thumb drive, that's a very simple batch script file that would also be a very good procedure for you to do.
Yeah, I could probably get rid of some of these since they are 4 years old.
Right, exactly.
So
it's on you. But also, 1 gigabyte, I can't, I think the smallest USB drive I have is 4.
Right.
And I got for that one for free. So it's not a large file size there.
Sure.
Yeah, I got a great feature suggestion from Kevin, where he's kind of always thought it'd be neat to have some little additional thing in the title bar showing you what LandFX project is active. So we've been chatting about that. So many, and just, also want to remind everyone that so much of what you're seeing has come from user suggestions, and some more adamantly stomping their feet. This is how we need it to work, and we find a way to do that. But we really love user suggestions. So with anything, you have ideas or you want things to work easier, let us know. We actually do incorporate those ideas. So other than that, I think it's pretty much time to wrap up, unless you have any closing thoughts, Jake.
No, I have a lot of thoughts, but The stuff that we went over today obviously might be review for some, new to others, but the most important thing to remember is the workflow itself, being able to understand the concepts of these project data files, why they're so important. Because as you start looking at these other webinars that we're going to do, it's going to be very apparent of what the power is behind having that data file, and being able to do the things that we do is because of this additional data. So setting up your projects right, setting up, and again, we're not even going into the sheet setup part of things. This is just literally how the project list functions, how you back up, how you restore, how you create new, keeping things organized here. I can't tell you how awesome it is to have this kind of list, and whether you're scrolling and scrolling and scrolling because you have so many projects, well, maybe it's time to start marking read only, clean that list up. They're getting backed up. If you need to ever open up a drawing from past stuff, just to have that flexibility to just pop in, restore that file, bring it back from read only, whatever it is, it does make everything a lot easier from a managerial standpoint, and does help you from all the way down the line. So with that in mind, I've got nothing else. So thank you guys.